Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man is perfect, and that's the problem.
That's fucking stupid.
I know in the last video I said that Tom Holland's Spider-Man was the perfect Spider-Man, but Andrew's Spider-Man is more perfect. Like Peter Parker of Earth 120703 is scarily accurate to his comic book counterpart.
They're the same.
But before we get into that, like the last video, this one's gonna be split into two parts: Andrew's Peter and Andrew's movies. So fasten your goddamn seatbelt.
Okay, boomer. Okay, boomer. Okay, boomer. Okay, boomer. Okay.
Check this out. Peter Parker in the comics is witty, a science lover, broke as shit, deeply insecure, and has bad luck and an even worse temper. Now let's see if Andrew's Spider-Man exhibits any of those traits. Is he witty? Duh. And he's witty in a very classic Spider-Man way. Whenever he puts on the mask, almost everything that comes out of his mouth is a goddamn joke.
You alright?
Just Spider-Man. Nigga, shut the hell up and eat a cinnamon roll.
He even does the thing where his jokes are an actual part of his fighting style. They aren't just there for the audience to laugh at, they're actually used to throw his enemies off and to annoy them during combat. Is he a science lover? Yes. So much so that science actually plays a huge part in the final battle of both films. Is he broke as shit? Hell yeah. Is he deeply insecure? Hell yeah. Does he have bad luck? Well, you tell me. But does he have an even worse temper? Oh yeah. He's so angry, in fact, that the only reason that he even makes the Spider-Man suit is that the police don't recognize him when he beats Uncle Ben's killers to death. Holy shit! Yeah, Andy's Peter not only has all 6 of these traits, but on top of that, he's comic accurate in ways that I didn't even think mattered. In the first movie, he's a loner and doesn't really give a shit about anyone that aren't his aunt or his uncle, like the Lee and Ditko books. Peter is very socially inept and has a hard time connecting with his high school peers, but once he graduates, he mellows out and brightens up his personality. Like the Lee Romita Sr. books, responsibility isn't natural to him, but his time as Spider-Man changes him for the better. Like all Spider-Man books. One thing that I want people to know is that Peter's morals and ideals aren't built into him from the start like in the Raimi trilogy. His no-kill rule, the idea that no one dies on his watch, the power and responsibility mantra, all things that Peter learned through his time as Spider-Man. And the Amazing Spider-Man movies do a great job of highlighting this element of Peter's psyche. How many times in the comics has he literally said, "I'm going to kill you" to his enemies? I'll kill you! How many times in the first movie does Peter let some of the criminals go because they aren't Uncle Ben's killer? His time as a hero fill in the cracks within Peter's morality. So, if my math is still correct, Peter Parker of Earth 120703 is 110% accurate to his comic book counterpart.
Ain't no way.
I mean, good God, the man just looks like Peter Parker, right down to his thick-ass eyebrows and perfect hairline. Like, what the fuck? How? How? Andrew Garfield is Spider-Man, but that's actually a problem. You see, Andy here is so accurate to his comic book counterpart that he's damn near redundant. There is so little setting this Spider-Man apart from the comics, and he barely brings any of his own unique character traits and mannerisms to the table. I think the only unique thing about him is that he listens to terrible pop music.
And I will do it for
Just kidding, I know that he also skateboards. But literally everything else about this version of the character, from the way he looks to the way he acts, is tied back to the comics in some way. And for a lot of comic book fans who watch these movies, that's great. But for me, not so much. I definitely value comic book accuracy when it comes to the core fundamentals of these characters, but if you've seen my other videos, you know that I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of adapting these characters beat by beat, word for word. There needs to be some fucking distinction, especially when talking about adaptations. I don't think I've ever outright said this, but it's really fucking obvious that Tom Holland is my favorite live-action Spider-Man, because on top of being a faithful adaptation, he adds new and additional character traits that set his version apart from the rest. For example, Thomas's Peter Parker, in a very Clark Kent sort of way, is overly polite, almost to a fault. He calls every adult that he's around ma'am or sir, and if he knows their name, he still calls them miss or mister. Even after yelling at Happy in the Quinjet, he says,
"I'm sorry, Happy. I'm sorry, I shouldn't shout."
I think his over politeness stems from the fact that this Peter Parker always tries his best to operate on a base optimism. Even when his life turns to shit, he still looks on the bright side.
Listen, let's just focus on the good news, okay?
Man, shut your bitch ass up, nigga.
John Watts is well aware of comic book Spider-Man's attitude, but he constructs his Spider-Man in a way that where his optimism is one of his most powerful weapons. And Mark Webb, God bless him, just ripped Spider-Man straight out of the pages. Again, I know that's what a lot of you love about Andrew, but for me personally, that's a very uninteresting way to adapt adapt these characters, I'm sorry. I prefer when artists build upon pre-established character traits and do something new with them, which I know is pretty hard to do considering Peter Parker is already a pretty perfect character. But you could have at least tried to do something. But hey, Marcus, I love you. Andy, I love you. Samuel, eat my ass.
Okay, boomer. Okay, boomer. Okay, boomer. Okay, boomer. Okay.
Amazing Spider-Man 1 review. This movie is pretty fucking good. I've gone back and forth on this movie for years, but on this recent rewatch, I really enjoyed myself. For one thing, the acting in this movie, in both of these movies really, is great. There isn't a single bad performance, especially from Andrew, who despite not being my favorite Spider-Man, is still my favorite actor to play this character. His mannerisms and even the way he talks really help make this version of Peter Parker feel real. Notice how he mumbles everything and kinda has a hard time looking people in the eye? This is how a real-life antisocial loner would act. Mark Webb is a really great director of actors, and it shows in this movie. I really like the writing of this movie. Not necessarily the plot itself, but I do like the way that the story is told and the characterization. Name check, Uncle Ben. Who finally isn't this gross ass, nasty ass Jesus figure whose philosophy forces Peter into a never ending, unchanging cycle. This time around, he's just a regular nigga. And Ben's message to Peter is for Peter to use his gifts in whatever way he sees fit. That's fucking perfect. Because that's the whole point of the great power comes great responsibility speech. Another character that was done right was Aunt May. Sally Field is the best Aunt May, hands down. You really get to see how Peter coming and going with bruises and cuts on his face really takes a toll on her, as it obviously would. This is Spider-Man's fucking mother that we're talking about. Her husband just got banished to the Shadow Realm. Give this bitch a break.
Please!
Those dramatic scenes between Peter and May are really well done, and both actors are clearly giving it their all. Same goes for the scenes between Peter and Gwen. I'm not the biggest fan of the filmmaking here. The direction is fine. Not great, not terrible. But the editing is kind of awful.
What is this bullshit?
There are numerous scenes that leave me dumbfounded and asking the question, why the fuck was this cut like this? The biggest offenders of this are the train scene and the first person POV sequence. But yeah, beyond that, I still really like this movie. It's a great drama and character study, and is without a doubt the best Spider-Man origin movie. Fuck all of you. Yeah, I'm feeling a decent 8 on this one. Next movie, The Amazing Spider-Man 2. This movie is always cited as the worst Spider-Man movie by a landslide. The average Spider-Man fan always ranks this as the lowest out of all of them. But as you know, we here at Closive Incorporated aren't exactly average when it comes to our Spider-Man opinions. And yeah, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is the second best Spider-Man 2. Hey! I know. But the convoluted plot, but the insane amount of side characters, but the ridiculous pacing. Hey, you wanna know what other movie had all these problems? Fucking Spider-Man 3, and you all know how I feel about that film. And guess what? The Amazing Spider-Man 2 has something that Spider-Man 3 never had. Great drama. Yeah, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is pretty fucking good. The acting is great as always. Even with this film having 4,000 goddamn side characters, everyone gives a great performance, including Jamie Foxx's Electro. Remember last video when I said that No Way Home redeemed him? I misspoke, you dumb motherfucker. He's already great in this movie and has great chemistry with Dane DeHaan's Harry Osborn. And he's even funnier here than he is in No Way Home, though that might be unintentional.
You ready to give up?
Speaking of Harry, I actually really like this version of the character. I definitely like him more than Raimi's version. This whole movie I kind of felt bad for him, because you really see how desperate he becomes when trying not to die, even though it doesn't make a lot of sense as a plot device. But the execution of it was done pretty well, and I like Mr. DeHaan's performance for the most part. In fact, despite all the shit happening in this movie, I have to say most of it is well executed. Speaking of executed, Gwen Stacy. Oh, and dude, the filmmaking here? Holy shit, it's perfect. This is how you shoot a Spider-Man movie. The camera work and the lighting and the color grading in every single scene is amazing. No pun intended. The set design is fucking impeccable. Dog, look at Peter's room. So much care and thought was put into just the little things. Same goes for the Oscorp building and all of the sets that take place within it. I mean, just look at these goddamn computers. Jesus Christ. Sticking to the design of this movie, the Spider-Man suit is perfect. I don't care what this dickhead has to say about it. By the way, Kai, this indirect call-out post was very cringe and lame. At least do it on TikTok so I can see it, you coward. Anyway, I'm feeling a strong 7 on this one.
What the fuck?
Closing thoughts. Something that I would like to point out about these movies is that they are way more emotionally intense than any other live-action Spider-Man movie. The drama is very real and tangible. It really fucking hurts seeing these characters suffer. And I think it's because, again, these actors really fucking tried with these characters. Everyone involved with these movies tried. They really did. But in spite of everything, the fans and the critics hated these films. And now we have no Amazing Spider-Man 3. Thanks, guys! Another thing that I would like to bring up is an analogy. I'm going to be comparing the 3 Spider-Men with rappers. Please stay with me. Tobey Maguire Spider-Man and Tom Holland Spider-Man are analogous to J. Cole, wait for it, and Kendrick Lamar. Now, before you go crazy, let me explain myself. Tobey's Peter Parker is J. Cole because in both cases their reputation precedes them. Much like how J. Cole is seen as the super woke, lyrical miracle rapper who always has the most nuanced take on everything despite never really showcasing that in any of his actual music, Tobey Spider-Man is seen as the super faithful, comic book accurate Spider-Man who's just ripped straight from the pages. When in reality, he is the exact opposite of comic book Peter Parker. J. Cole's instrumentals and delivery and his overall aesthetic may convince you that he has something to say when he really doesn't. The Raimi trilogy, being as goofy and theatrical as it is, might remind you of the tone of a comic book, but the actual content of the film steer very far away from their source material. And if you think that's a stretch, wait till you hear the Kendrick Lamar comparison. Tom is Kendrick, because in both cases the popularity of the art is proportionate to its quality. And much like how Kendrick is able to infuse elements of older classic hip-hop within his style whilst also adding in elements of contemporary hip-hop and trap, the MCU Spidey films not only add elements of older John Hughes movies but also directly rip the more lighthearted and self-aware nature of the Lee and Ditko comics whilst also mixing in elements of contemporary superhero movies and Spider-Man stories. So if Tobey is J. Cole and Tom is fucking Kendrick, who is Andrew? Andrew is JID or Jid, because both are so effortlessly good at what they're trying to do and both kind of represent the perfect example of their respective fields. Also, despite being quite popular in their own right, in comparison to the other two, both JID and Andrew are criminally underrated. Anyway, that was it. That was all. The end of this trilogy of videos that I totally planned from the start. And if you're curious, these are my rankings for the Spider-Man movies right here. Oh, what was that? It went by too fast and you couldn't read it? Too fucking bad. It was a one-time deal. I love you. Subscribe. Goodbye.